We're continuing in the Kuzaris. We're on page 129. We're talking about the afterlife and trying to understand the conspicuous absence of the afterlife in Tanakh. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi had said that the afterlife was never meant to be the incentive for living a good life, because in reality there are ample incentives for living a good life in this world. The good life in this world is V'hayisi lachem le'elokim, that I, God, will be for you as a God. That you will be able to have this experience in life of feeling a closeness, a palpable closeness with Hashem through the prophetic experience. And that's the most gratifying and rewarding experience that a human being can have. It is as desirable as having a wonderful afterlife experience. And the one benefit that it has over a guarantee of the afterlife is that you don't have to wonder whether it's actually going to happen or not. It'll be something within your purview, and you'll be able to experience it, and therefore it's more real. And so that's why the Torah spends more time on promising the benefits of this world than promising the benefits of the next world. And that it also explains another interesting question, which is that if the ultimate goal is the afterlife, then why shouldn't people chalish to die? Why shouldn't people be anticipating death with great excitement and just really, I can't wait to get there? You know, Chazal tell us, our sages tell us, that the advantage that the living have over the dead is that lo hamesim yahalaluka, that the dead don't have the opportunity to serve God in a bilateral kind of relationship where each one is doing something for the other. We have an opportunity in this world to relate to Hashem in a way where He gives to us and we give to Him, and we have this loving kind of marital relationship with God. In the next life, we're on the receiving end, but there's really not much that we're giving. And so therefore, there's a tremendous benefit to living a life that is filled with closeness to Hashem, where the individual can feel that closeness through the prophetic experience that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has emphasized time and again throughout the Sefer. This prophetic experience, the revelatory experience, the ability to see and to perceive and to communicate with Hashem, is in itself the greatest good that a human being can experience, regardless of whether he is embodied or disembodied, regardless of whether you're alive or you're dead. So that, for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, says that's why the Torah doesn't need to talk about an afterlife at all. And that also explains why people aren't chalashing to die. I want you to keep this in mind. I want you to keep this in mind when we're going to learn a little bit. I want to refer to this idea again when we talk about Parshas Chayei Sarah, because there's a very interesting small little lesson. Today we're going to spend most of our time on the Kuzaris, and we'll spend the last maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes on the Parsha. So in paragraph 4, I'll just review it before we assign a reader. Our Torah and all its rewards are absolutely guaranteed. None of them has ever been or ever will be unfulfilled. Meaning the rewards that the Torah says what will happen if you follow the ways of Hashem. All the rewards have one common denominator: the hope of drawing near to God and His angels. Now, what an angel is, I'm not going to define now. Angels mean different things for different people, in different contexts and in different vocabulary. But perhaps what we can use as our definition of an angel for now is when you feel a sense of spirituality, you feel a sense of transcendence, you feel that you're surrounded by an air of something which is above this world. Because if we try to define angels in a more concrete, objectified way, I think that many of us will come up short. Sure, there's a very specific definition of angels as they're described in the book of Isaiah and in the book of Ezekiel, having 6 wings and having legs and arms and praying and responding. And there's a place for that kind of definition, but I don't think that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi wants us to use that kind of definition in describing the angels here. And you'll see when we get to his analogy, you'll see what I'm talking about. Someone who achieves this level will not fear death, for he realizes the goodness that awaits him. Our Torah demonstrates the rewards that await us after death through the spiritual rewards of closeness that exist in this world. And therefore, like in footnote 171, if you take a look, he says, with this, the Rabbi has also explained why the Torah does not explicitly list the reward of the world to come. The ultimate reward in Judaism is closeness to God. This can be realized both in this world and in the world to come. The real reason why the Torah refers only to the closeness that may be attained in this world, however, is similar to what the Kuzaris stated above, that rewards that come after death do not provide adequate incentive to the religionist because no one's come back to tell us about them. We can't experience them firsthand, etc. Okay, so here is another famous analogy that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi provides us with. It's the analogy of, it's called the Indian parable, but it's Indian parable number 2. Who remembers Indian parable number 1? It was a long time ago. If you've been following along in this class, what was Indian parable number 1? Go through. Anyone have notes on this shiur? Just let me see what page it's on. Yeah, it was on page 68, I think.
Yeah, 69, 68, 69.
I looked in the index. I cheated. I just looked up India in the index. Okay. If you go back to page 69, or 68 actually, we're talking about, here the parable was about revelation of God. How do you know that God exists, and how do you know the nature of God? The only way that you can really know who God is and what He's all about is if you have a face-to-face revelation. And that's why in the Kuzari, the Rabbi in the Kuzari narrative, in trying to explain why when he introduces what Judaism is all about, he doesn't introduce Judaism as a story about the God who created heaven and earth, but Judaism is rather the story of God who gave us the Torah and revealed Himself to us on Sinai. And the Khazar king was very disturbed by this portrayal, this initial sort of introduction to Judaism. He says, wouldn't it be more appropriate to describe God as the creator of heaven and earth than to describe God as the being who revealed Himself in one period in history to a one specific group of people? And so in trying to explain himself, the Rabbi gives the following Indian parable. He says, what is the greatest evidence of that the king of India is a benevolent and wise king? He says, the only way that you can actually prove that is if you had some kind of encounter with the king, where the king sends you down from his palace a treasure chest full of special gifts with the official seal of the king of India. He says, otherwise, you may not be ever convinced that there really is a king of India, and even if someone convinces you that there is a king, you may never know what the nature of this king is, whether he's benevolent and wise or whether he's foolish and malevolent. So therefore, you need to have this kind of real encounter with the king of India. So that was the first Indian parable. This is known as Indian parable number 2. And it's a parable about the encounter that a Jew is able to have with Hashem in this world. And how it is possible to achieve the prophetic experience and really have this sense of real closeness with Hashem while still in this life. You don't have to wait until the afterlife to experience that closeness with God. So we need a reader today. It's a nice long parable. Goes on until page 131. So we need someone with a strong voice. Can someone read us the parable today, beginning with paragraph number 5 on page 129? Please, just because of the camera, just
Yeah, I think my voice carries.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, good. Thank you, Patricia. Go ahead, please.
We cite the following analogy. A group of kinsmen became stranded in the desert. One of them found his way to India. He was received by the king of India, who accorded him honor and great prestige, because the king realized that this man was a member of this group, and that the father of this group used to be one of the king's close friends. The king gave him precious gifts to bring back to his kinsman in the desert. He also dressed him in beautiful clothing and sent along with him some of his distinguished attendants. It never would have occurred to anyone that these important attendants would ever leave the king, and certainly not that they would ever travel into the desert.
All right, stop there. All right, let's see how much you can figure out so far. Let's go back to the analogy. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is very precise in choosing the wording for this analogy. A group of kinsmen became stranded in the desert. Okay? Who's that? The Jews. They leave Mitzrayim. They go out into the desert. Even though the Jewish people were not stranded in the desert, but Hashem wanted us to feel like we were stranded, so that when it came time to have this encounter, we would feel like we were being reconciled after having been lost. Okay, one of them found his way to India. Who's that? Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu goes atop Har Sinai and ascends to heaven, according to the Torah. Moshe Allah El HaElokim, that Moshe ascended to God. And the Medrash elaborates on that idea that although Moshe's body remained on Har Sinai, but his consciousness, his neshama, ascends up to Shamayim. He's received by the king of India, who accords him honor and great prestige. And what honor and great prestige are we talking about? Well, the Gemara in Tractate Shabbat describes how Moshe is received in the great Pamalia Shalmala, the great heavenly entourage of above, where all of the angels are surrounding the Kisei HaKavod, the divine throne. And although the angels initially are very hostile towards Moshe, because they say, Ma Yilud Isha Beinenu, what is this mortal man born of a woman doing here among us? And God says, Moshe, you need to respond to them, what you're here for. And he says, I'm here to receive the Torah that can help guide us. And eventually the angels all befriend him, and he becomes a beloved member of this Pamalia Shalmala, of this heavenly entourage. So he's accorded great honor and great prestige. And it's because the king realized that this man was a member of this group, he's part of the Jewish people, and that the father of this group used to be one of the king's close friends. Who's the father? Avraham Avinu. Okay. So our relationship, says Hashem, goes back to Avraham Avinu, and he was such a good friend of mine. I made a covenant with him that I would always watch over his children and have a special relationship with them. Fine. The king gave him precious gifts to bring back to his kinsmen in the desert. What is this? The Torah, the Luchot, the Ten Commandments on the tablets. He also dressed him in beautiful clothing and sent along with him some of his distinguished attendants. What is this? What is the beautiful clothing? Could be the mitzvot. That's certainly, yes, it could be. That's one interpretation. I like that, yes. What else? What else could it be? What is Moshe wearing when he comes down the mountain? The Karnei Or, right? The beams of light that shine off of his face. It's just a sign that he's been garbed by the king of India, by the king in heaven. And he's sent along by distinguished attendants. What is this? So here we have that Hashem says, my Shekhinah will accompany you now that you've come down the mountain, my divine presence. And we can call this the heavenly presence or the angelic presence as well, because the Shekhinah is sometimes described as an angelic entity. Right? Again, it becomes very complicated, but we're going to just simplify it. It's whether it's the angelic entourage is what the Shekhinah is, or the Shekhinah is a manifestation of God. But that's the attendants that the king in heaven, the king of India, sends down with Moshe to accompany the Jewish people in all of their travels through the desert. It never would have occurred to anyone that these important attendants would ever leave the king. What is an angelic or divine presence doing down in this corporeal, flawed world. It seems to run counter the intuition that people have, the notion that people have about divinity, that divinity would never contaminate itself by being present in this world. It's one of the unique features of the Torah and the Jewish people, that kol makom sha'ata motzei gedulaso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that anywhere you find God's greatness, sham ata motzei an visanuso, you also find God's great humility, that God is prepared to lower himself, to make himself, or make a manifestation of himself, a part of this lowly corporeal realm. So that goes counter to what we would envision or imagine about God. Okay, so Patricia, please continue.
The king obliged the man to obey a set of commands and made a pact with him, in which the man pledged fealty to the king. The man then traveled back to his kinsman in the desert, accompanied by the Indian representatives. His friends were overjoyed upon the arrival of this entourage, and they built a palace for these distinguished attendants to live in.
Okay, how are we doing so far? King obliges the man to obey a set of commands, mitzvot, makes a pact with him, in which the man pledges fealty to the king on behalf of his kinsman, Nasa v'nishma, right? The man travels back to his kinsman in the desert, accompanied by the Indian representatives, by the Shekhinah, by the angelic presence. His friends, the rest of Klal Yisrael, are overjoyed that the Moshe Rabbeinu has brought back the Luchos. And of course, he's glossing over the Chet HaEgel. Sorry, we covered that already. We're not coming back to that. And they build a palace for these distinguished attendants to live in, which is, of course, the Mishkan. Okay, good. Continue, please.
The rest of the group then sent a delegation back to India to see the king. They were now able to reach India without any trouble through the help of the king's representatives, who showed them the closest and straightest route.
Wait a minute. What's going on over here?
Yeah.
Okay, what's the analogy now?
The Avoda?
The Kohanim.
Could be. I think it's more than just the avoda, though. But that's I think you're on the right track. What else could it be? The Kohanim themselves, but more than the Kohanim, we're talking about Nevi'im. All future prophets had the pathway paved for them by the initial process of bringing the Shekhinah into this world via the giving of the Torah. When Hashem sends the Torah into this world and he makes himself a part of this world, it is now a portal has been opened and a pathway has been paved between God's heavenly realm and this world. And it now becomes easier for people to travel back and forth from this earthly realm to the heavenly realm because of this portal that has been opened through the giving of the Torah and through the resting of the divine presence in this world. That's what prophecy essentially is. It is the ability to link oneself to the Shekhinah that is in this world and to interface with God thereby. So that's what we're referring to over here. Continue, please.
It was then that they realized that it is in reality quite easy for anyone who so desires to reach India, as long as he commits himself to the service of the king and honors the king's messengers appropriately when they are sent to him. They had no reason to question the need to serve the king, because it was obvious to all that the purpose was to become close to the king, and closeness to the king was the greatest good.
And so you see that this is one more example where we find a bit of a departure between Rabbi Yehuda Halevi and Maimonides in the Rambam. Because for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, the prophetic experience is rooted in piety more than it is rooted in intellectual proficiency. We've talked about this a number of times before, but I just wanted to accentuate this point over here as well. You see, for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, the purpose of serving the king and to show one's devotion to him is because the benefit is almost immediate and self-compensatory. What happens is, as soon as I do a mitzvah, as soon as I act piously, I immediately connect with the King. I immediately connect with Hashem, and that allows me to have this amazing relationship with God. So imagine yourself in a world where your closeness with Hashem is very detectable, because through your performance of mitzvahs, you immediately feel this connection. Now, immediately someone should be jumping on this parable and saying, that's great for the people of the desert. That's great for when we had a Beis HaMikdash. That's great for the prophetic experience. But what about us, who don't feel any of this gratification through our piety? You know, you don't get the immediate returns that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is describing. Hold on to that thought. We're going to come to that shortly. Okay, so continue reading. So now that he's finished with the parable, and that the closeness to the king is the greatest good, and that's self-evident, so now let's see how he explains the parable. Go ahead.
In this parable, the group of kinsmen is the Jewish people. The first of them who went to India is Moshe. The subsequent delegation is comprised of the other Jewish prophets. The Indian representatives of the king are the divine presence and the angels. The beautiful clothing is the spiritual light that rested upon Moshe's soul as a result of his prophecy, as well as the physical light that radiated from his face. The precious gift sent by the king are the 2 tablets which contain the 10 commandments.
Okay, very good. Okay, those are the precious gifts. So basically we've hit on the major points of this parable. Let's do one more paragraph to see now how Rabbi Yehuda Halevi contrasts Judaism with other religions in this light, in this area of talking about the afterlife. Number 7.
The other religions which derive from Judaism never were witness to any of this. Instead, their founders told their followers, pledge fealty to the king of India just as those kinsmen did, and after death you will reach the king. If you do not commit yourselves to him, the king will distance you from himself and will torture you after you die. All
right, hold there for just a second. Okay, so this is a very biting paragraph. Okay, it's a very it's like a very powerful statement that he's just made. The reason why other religions emphasize the afterlife is because they are not privy to this kind of gratifying experience through acts of piety. The prophetic experience is a unique experience to the Jewish people. No other nation is capable of the prophetic experience. And on that basis, because that gratification is not something that we can guarantee you in this life, there's only one thing that we can resort to, which is the gratifying benefits of what happens to you after you die. And that's the reason why other religions were forced to talk about the afterlife as the only promise that they could make reasonably, because we don't have anything to promise you in this world. So we know that there's a Bible, and in the Bible, the great children of Israel that are talked about in the Bible had that amazing relationship with God. We don't have it anymore, but you will have it when you go to the afterlife, when you go to Kingdom Come, or you go to the next life. And of course, in order to reinforce the necessity to follow this religion, we have to be equally as strong with using negative reinforcement and telling you that if you don't follow the Lord Messiah, you'll be condemned to eternal damnation. Okay, and therefore that's the torture that you'll experience after you die. So that really explains the greater emphasis in Christianity, and perhaps in Islam as well, on the afterlife, because the rewards of this world are not evident. Now, many of you may recall that we've discussed this extensively in the past, that this represents another great divide between Rabbi Yehuda Halevi and the Rambam and Maimonides. The Rambam does not believe this kind of divide that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has set up for us between prophecy for the Jewish people and the rest of the world. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is unique in his claim that this kind of close prophetic experience is reserved exclusively for the Jewish people. For the Rambam, whether you're a Jew or a Gentile, you can achieve prophecy. And it's similarly rooted in the way the Rambam defines prophecy, because for the Rambam, prophecy is intellectual perfection. if you make yourself intellectually perfect and divest yourself of all distractions of this world and focus and meditate exclusively on the heavenly realms and on the universe all around you, then you'll be able to conjoin in some way with a great intelligence, a great heavenly intelligence that will make you privy to prophecy. It doesn't make a difference whether you're Jew or non-Jew. Do you remember that we learned from the Maimonides' Igeret Teiman, the Epistle of Yemen, where he writes a letter to the Jews of Yemen, and he tells them that the reason why we don't accept Muhammad is not because it's impossible for Gentiles to prophesy, but rather because Muhammad was an idiot. That's what he says. In other words, he says, if there is a prophet among the other nations who's legitimate, we would accept him. And that's why Job was a prophet, and Job's friends were prophets as well, even though they were not Jews. That's the example that he brings. He says, we have respect for non-Jewish prophets. And so you see that everything that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has written to this point is unacceptable to the Rambam. But at least let's appreciate where he's coming from. He has constructed for us a beautiful explanation as to why Judaism de-emphasizes the afterlife and why the New Testament and the Quran overly emphasize the afterlife. It's for one simple reason. The benefits of piety, of observing God, observing his mitzvahs, is something that we can experience in this world, that gratification of observing the mitzvahs. But for a Christian and a Muslim, for anyone who's not Jewish, you can't really glean the benefits of observance in this world because you cannot become a prophet. Okay? That's the basic thesis of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. Yes?
There is a bridging moment. It says that if you fulfill the commands of Indian king, the mitzvot, there is a Bnei Noach laws. If they fulfill the laws of the Bnei Noach, they will have same condition as Kuzaris.
Yeah, but he doesn't say that. He says explicitly not that way. He says that no matter what commandments you fulfill, as a Ben Noach, as a non-Jew, you cannot achieve this kind of gratification in this world. It is. Remember, he said it's the king gave special gifts to only this group of kinsmen in the desert, and made sure to treat them especially well because they were descended from a very close friend of the king. You see, so it's unique. It's a unique experience to the Jewish people. Yes.
Just want to clarify something. So the reward in this world for having that ability to have prophecy is a feeling of what? Of having the Shekhinah present? Is that? I'm
feeling the Shekhinah present, and I'm communicating. I'm communing in some way. It's hard for me to even explain it because I've never experienced it. One of the things that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is going to tell us about later on is the inadequacy of language to actually try to depict or describe the prophetic experience, because you know it when you have it, when you experience it, but attempting to try and describe it and share it with others is almost like, in the words of Maimonides, trying to describe a color to a person who's born blind. How do you describe blue to a person who was born without sight? It's impossible. And so therefore trying to describe that sense of closeness with Hashem to someone who's never experienced it is difficult. We come up short when we try to describe it linguistically, because there's nothing that in our lexicon, nothing in our language that can actually depict that kind of transcendent experience. Yeah.
So then the secondary question is, but most of us Jews don't have, and even in temple times, it wasn't the majority who had this prophetic experience. So it's a great gift, but most of us don't have it.
Right.
So what's the pull?
What's the pull? Yeah. That's a good, I think that's a fair question. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was of the opinion that if you lived during the times of prophecy, even if you yourself did not achieve prophecy, you could achieve near prophecy or association with prophets. And that itself was almost like a vicarious substitute for your own prophetic experience. He's alluded to that before, but it's a valid point. One of the things that we have to ask ourselves, as I mentioned, is what do Jews in a post-temple era do, and how do we get ourselves inspired? And he's going to have a separate analogy for that. We're going to actually skip, I don't think we may not have time to do it today, but we're going to skip to the third essay, where another analogy is presented to help the diaspora Jew cope with the fact that he feels distant from Hashem, and what inspires him in his prayers and allows him to continue his devotional exercises. Okay. So, oh yes. Go ahead.
Because of this, many of them have rejected their faith and have challenged it by saying, no one has ever returned from the dead to tell us that he has gone to the Garden of Eden or Gehenna. Nevertheless, most of these religionists have accepted this view and have prevailed upon others as well to follow in their service by using threats and intimidation in order to preserve their unity and power. Inwardly, their hope for this reward after death is weak, but outwardly they profess a strong faith in it. It is with this faith, in quotes, that they glorify themselves over their common foe.
Yes, so the priests, profess this great faith. It's an outward faith, but inwardly he says it's a weak faith. He's being cynical. Clearly he's being cynical of Christianity and perhaps Islam as well, because he says that it's really very hard to be inspired by something that you've never experienced and that no one has ever come back to report about. And so this really, I think that we need to sort of highlight this paragraph, because it should speak to us not only in contrasting Judaism to other religions, but in also reminding us what is it about Judaism that is supposed to inspire our own people to religious observance. He says, what is it? He says, because of this, because of the fact that their emphasis is on the afterlife that no one's ever experienced, many of them have rejected their faith and have challenged it by saying, no one's ever returned from the dead to tell us that he's gone to the Garden of Eden or Gehenna. If we want to try and provide proper impetus, proper incentive for people to stick with the program and to become faithful and to serve Hashem, we have to demonstrate some level, even if it's not a prophetic experience, but some level of gratification within the life that we live. That's why so many people are opposed to that statement, is schwer zu sein a Yid, right? It's difficult to be a Jew, right? Because if that's what life is about, it's difficult to be a Jew because I got multiple tuitions to pay for, and the price of kosher food is skyrocketed, and you have to be a millionaire in order to just be a middle-class Orthodox Jew. So then if that's the message, and we don't identify the benefits of the life in which we live, and we only talk about, and don't worry, eat your food, make a bracha, and you'll go to Gan Eden, that can't be the proper incentive for Jews today, just like it can't be a healthy incentive for a Christian. So for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, anytime Jews overly emphasize paradise and the future world and all of these things that have never happened and are supposed to happen in the future, it's not healthy. There has to be some kind of here and now benefit and gratification in order for us for ourselves to remain engaged and for our children to remain engaged. And if we can't find it for them, then we're playing Russian roulette. The reality is that, when you think about it, and many historians have reflected upon this, we have many different texts from different periods in our literary history. Many of these texts emphasize the afterlife more, and many of these texts emphasize the afterlife less. Using Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's thesis, those periods in history where life was great for the Jewish people because we were able to feel this kind of amazing closeness with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we felt secure, and we felt spiritual. There was no need to talk about an afterlife because you could experience the gratification of being a Jew in this world. Periods of diaspora and destruction and persecution led to an emphasis on the eschatology of the Jewish people, on the end of days for the Jewish people, because there was very little to hope for and to invest in the here and now. And so in order to resolve our cognitive dissonance, so to speak, in order to resolve the fact that Hashem promises us great things if we serve Him, and yet look at us now, we've just been kicked out of Eretz Yisrael, we've been decimated, we've been murdered, we've been slaughtered, our temple's been destroyed. How do we make sense of this? We then have to turn to the next world, because there's nothing here in this world. So during periods of persecution, it's certainly understandable how a people who have been beaten up have to look towards the future. But if we live in a world where life is great, then we can't be miserable. It's like one of the comedians today says, I think I quoted this in a drasha a few weeks ago. He says, life is amazing and everyone's miserable. Life is amazing and everyone's miserable. We have everything that a human being could possibly want, and we complain and we kvetch more than anyone else in the world. If a person, the wireless internet doesn't work for a few minutes on the airplane, a person starts cursing out the internet, right? But what about the fact that you're sitting amazingly in a chair in the sky, 30,000 feet above air, and you're going to be on the West Coast in 4 hours? You should be saying, oh my God, for 4 hours. Yes. You should be in a state of ecstasy for all of the amazing things that are going on in life. And if we don't share that, if we don't express that kind of joy of life with the world, with ourselves, with our families, so then for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, talking about what hasn't happened yet, and talking about Gan Eden, and talking about Olam Haba, just doesn't cut it. It's not sufficient. It's not sufficient incentive. All right, you're with me? Okay, good. So, yes?
So you want to have your cake and eat it too, is what you're doing. Because on the one hand, you're saying, we don't need to look to Olam Haba because life is so wonderful for us as Jews. But if life is not so wonderful, then we'll look to Olam Haba.
Precisely. Yeah.
Does that seem a little bit like a cop-out? Like, I don't know, to me it does.
Well, it's a cop-out in the sense that we cannot consistently maintain this theology in all times and in all places.
That's what I mean.
Well, but I don't know that that's necessarily a cop-out. Ultimately, we acknowledge that God is just. We work under that basic premise that is sort of inviolate. We can't ever question the absolute justice of the Ribono Shel Olam. So whenever we do find periods in life when things are bad for our people, the only thing that we can resort to is this iteration of history, this chapter of our people's existence is not for the now. We are a gap generation. We're meant to sort of pass it forward to the next generation so that their life will be glorious in the future. That's the history of our people. We're either celebrating now or we're miserable and we're looking forward to the next generation. And I don't think it's a cop-out. I just think that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is being realistic in saying that if we are only exclusively looking towards the future and not expressing the joys of Judaism, of joys of living a Jewish life in the here and now, we have to be a shtickle like Reb Zusha. So that even in the most miserable of existences, a guy like Reb Zusha could say that I've never suffered at all in my life. I'm living in a hovel without heat and in tattered rags on the floor, but at the same time, I never made a bracha on anything bad that happened to me in life because nothing ever bad happened to me. So even in the most, the most destitute of situations, a person still can relate to this kind of theology. And my reflection is simply this, that sometimes we find Jewish literature focusing more or less on the afterlife based upon the here and now, based upon the conditions of the here and now. It's not that the theology is incorrect. It's not that there is no afterlife, right? And that's what we talked about before. It's not that the afterlife doesn't exist. It's that it's not sufficient in and of itself as an adequate incentive to get us going and to get us excited about observing the mitzvahs of the Torah.
And I guess also, I don't want to feel that knowing about Olam Haba is merely a coping mechanism during hard times. Like, as you're talking, I'm thinking about Fiddler on the Roof, because much of what I think is colored by movies I watched as a kid. So life was so hard for them then, and he was talking to Master of the Universe and thinking about the next world, because life was miserable for them.
Yeah.
But I don't want to feel that Olam Haba is a coping mechanism for us. I want to feel that it's a real thing, and whether life is good or life is bad, it's there waiting for us.
I think that's a healthy approach. I agree. I agree with you. But it is a good coping mechanism too. I'm saying if you're
a side thing,
right? Not everyone can reach your Heiliger Madrega. You know what I'm saying?
I'm just saying intellectually, I want to feel that Olam Haba is there.
Yes.
If times are good or times are bad.
That would be the healthiest attitude, which is that I know it's there, it's a reality, but my incentive for serving Hashem is because of the greatness that I can achieve in this life through my mitzvahs. Just I know that I've reached my humanity, I've reached my purpose, and that's why I do what I do, not because of the Olam Haba that awaits me. Okay, and we're going to see something similar in the Rambam as well. Yes.
I think in some ways the point is that maybe a non-Jewish perspective is if I accept that there is, whoever you want to call it as God, then I'm going to have this better thing after this physical life. And I think that the point that he's making is that's not enough from a Jewish perspective. This world has the presence of God. It's not enough to just accept him esoterically. We have to interact with him, and we have to serve him physically while we are physical beings.
Well said. Very good. Good. Excellent. One last paragraph, Patricia, on page 132, and then we'll be done.
It's already about the course.
All right, just last paragraph.
But how can they hope to glorify themselves with the argument of a rich afterlife to someone who has experienced the reward in this world? Wasn't the substance of the Jewish prophets and pious ones closer to the life of the world to come than the substance of anyone of another religion who has not reached that level?
Okay, so this is the polemic against Christian missionaries. You want to try and proselytize me to become a Christian with your promise of an afterlife? That pales by the experiences of my Jewish ancestors. My Jewish ancestors experienced heaven on earth. They experienced heaven in this world by staying faithful to Torah. So why should I leave my faith that has heaven on this earth potentially to exchange it for something that can only promise me gifts in the afterlife? That's the reason why any effort at proselytizing a believing Jew will fall flat on its face. See, so that's a beautiful way to conclude this whole idea, which is that not only does, let's say, Christianity emphasize the afterlife because that's all it's got, but that's also why a Jew of faith would be foolish to leave Judaism to go to Christianity, because the rewards that are depicted by our ancestors are gratification of this world, which are so far, so much surpass anything that is talked about in other faiths in the next world. Okay, good. Yes?
Why do you say that the only thing Christianity has to offer is the rewards of the next world? aren't there Christian families that are happy and Christian communities that are happy and good Samaritans and people doing good things as Christians?
All valid, all valid. Perhaps you might criticize Rabbi Yehuda Halevi as being overly simplistic and not giving enough credit to the joy of being a good Christian. Okay, that's possible. I'm not going to contest that. But from his vantage point, he sees perhaps a very orthodox Catholicism of his age, which doesn't have any of that richness. Maybe today in America, evangelical Christianity is a little bit different from the austere, oppressive kind of Catholicism of the 12th century. Okay?